The iPhone 11, Apple's budget device from 2019, is almost 7 years old and it's still getting iOS software support. Let's talk about how this iPhone stacks up in 2026 and whether or not you should buy one. We'll go over specs, current pricing, talk about what this phone's good at, what it's bad at, and if this is a good value in 2026. So let's begin talking about the iPhone 11. The iPhone 11 has a very familiar design. This looks like every other device that Apple has launched since the iPhone X, but there are a few differences that stand out and make this phone a little bit unique compared to some of the other devices that Apple has launched. Taking a look at the front, we see there is no dynamic island. We do still have the notch up at the top, and it is the wide notch. So when comparing this to something like the iPhone 13, that notch is still quite a bit bigger than some of the newer devices. And it certainly is not as neat as the dynamic island. The display is a 6.1-inch LCD panel at 60 Hz. This is the last LCD iPhone that Apple launched, and the resolution is actually not that great. It might be hard for you guys to see, but if we zoom in here, the pixels actually start to begin to show up. You can look at the images over here in the settings app, and unfortunately I can't get quite as close as I want, but you can actually start to see some of those pixels here on the LCD panel. The resolution is nowhere near as good as the OLED phones that were launched at the same time, such as the iPhone X, XS, XS Max, and then every iPhone with the iPhone 12 and later. So this is not an OLED panel, but considering it's LCD, I think it is one of the best LCD panels Apple has ever made, and I think it's quite nice. Unfortunately, it is only 60 Hz, so there is no ProMotion here on this device. That said, it is not a terrible experience. If you've never used ProMotion, then running here at 60 Hz is really not the end of the world. But if you're coming from a device that does have more than a 60 Hz screen, you're definitely going to notice some of the lagging and stuttering here that comes with a 60 Hz screen. Flipping the device over, we have a glass back with aluminum frames, and I think this actually feels really nice. I do like the aluminum frames. It feels very sturdy. The phone is actually decently heavy. It is not quite as light as some of the other phones, but I do think the design here on the iPhone 11 is really nice. We've got dual cameras on the back. We've got the regular lens that every phone has ever had, and then we have a wide angle lens for that 0.5 zoom. So if we head into the camera application, we've got the ×1, and then we've got the 0.5 as well. So nothing too spectacular there with the cameras. They are just fine. They're both 12 megapixels. We do have an LED flash and a microphone up there. This iPhone is in the white color. The iPhone 11 came in a bunch of different colors, and I think they all look pretty nice. The different colors available included red, black, white, yellow, a tealish green, and then a light lavender purple. I, of course, have the white one here. I think the red and the black look fantastic, and really you can't go wrong. It just comes down to personal preference about which color phone you like. The front is always going to be black. There are no other colors available for the front of the device. That is a trend Apple has continued starting with the iPhone X. Down at the bottom, we do have a lightning connector, so this is still using that lightning port. And unfortunately, that is going to hold you back a little bit here in 2026, as pretty much every other device is going to have USB-C. There's a speaker and a microphone down here at the bottom. We also have a speaker up in the earpiece at the top. So in landscape mode, you do get dual stereo sound. So that is nice. This phone does still have a SIM card tray. As you can see there, you can pop that out and put in a nano SIM. So if you are looking for a device that does not have eSIM, the iPhone 11 will check that box for you. This phone does, of course, support eSIM as well as dual SIM, but it is nice to still have that physical SIM card tray. So talking about the internal specs, this iPhone does have the A13 Bionic chip that's clocked at 2.66 gigahertz. That is a 6-core CPU with 2 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, and it still runs very well. That chip has a 4-core GPU as well as 4 gigabytes of LPDDR4X memory. That 4 gigabytes of memory is going to hold you back a little bit here, and you're definitely going to run into some stutters and having to reload applications and websites with that small amount of memory. So let's go ahead and run Geekbench 6 and we'll see what the CPU and the GPU scores show for the iPhone 11. Okay, the CPU benchmarks are done, and the single core scores coming in at 1789 and multi-core at 3869. So these are quite a bit slower than modern iPhones, but really not too bad. The performance of the iPhone 11 is still very snappy, and I think it is a very clean and usable device. Especially considering the low resolution of the screen here, the GPU and the CPU don't have to work all that hard to get this device running at 60 frames per second, which is what's going to give it that really smooth appearance. So even though the performance numbers are lower than what we might want to see from a device we're using in 2026, it still feels very smooth, very fluid. Multitasking feels nice, although that 4 gigabytes of RAM is going to limit you a little bit in terms of applications you can keep open in the background. I would not take those performance numbers with a negative attitude, because I think there is much more to the story than that, especially with iOS 27 coming out here, which is a refinement and hopefully improving on performance and battery life. I think the iPhone 11 still holds up pretty well in terms of its ability to run smoothly with modern operating systems. Now, I want to show you guys the camera on this device. We mentioned that this has two 12 megapixel lenses, a regular zoom lens, and then the ultra wide. It takes good photos, and in terms of videos, we can do 4K 60 FPS, which is what I record most of my videos in. So let's go ahead and start a video here, and I'll show you guys what this looks like. So let's go ahead and switch over to the iPhone 11. And here we are. This is how the iPhone 11 looks and sounds. I am using the built-in microphone, so it's probably gonna sound a bit different because I don't have my main DJI mic set up here. But I think the quality here looks very nice. There is optical image stabilization, so it shouldn't be too shaky. And in terms of the resolution, you're getting the full 4K 60 FPS that I record all of my videos in. So let's take a look here. This is an iPhone 13 that looks to be a little bit oversaturated. Let's go ahead and turn that down. How does that look for you guys? I think this looks pretty clean. I could probably record most of my videos with this device, and you might not be able to tell a huge difference. I usually use the iPhone 17 Pro Max to record my videos, and of course I'm sure that does look a little bit better here, but using the iPhone 11 I think is certainly passable in 2026. Let's go ahead and zoom out to the, well, I was gonna zoom out to the 0.5, but I can't actually do that while I'm recording, so we'll go ahead and hold off on that. But the main lens here is quite capable, and I am very impressed with the quality here. So let's go ahead and switch back to the main setup. All right, there you guys got to see and hear how the iPhone 11 records video and audio. I think it looked very nice as I was previewing it there on the device. We'll see how it looks once I get it into Final Cut Pro and we compare it to the rest of the footage recorded on my main 17 Pro Max. But overall, I think the quality is very promising on the iPhone 11. It is kind of funny to see the back of the device and just how small the camera bump is. I mean, it just barely sticks out. When we look at newer devices that have a massive camera bump, especially the 17 series, I mean, it takes up like the entire back of the phone. And then when you look at it from the side, it is a massive bump on the device. The iPhone 11 keeps that to a minimum, and you really can't tell at all that there is a camera bump. I mean, just ever so slightly. So if you're looking for a really clean, flat phone on the back, the iPhone 11 has you covered for that. You can pretty much set it on a table and there is hardly any rock at all on the device. So that is something to keep in mind as well. The bezels around the display here are actually quite a bit larger than even the OLED phones at the time. So with these LCD devices, Apple chose to keep the bezels a little bit bigger. I'm sure that kept costs down on the production line. But it is a 6.1 inch display. And I think this phone just feels fantastic. It is very solid. It feels super sturdy. It feels very premium. And honestly, I think the design of this phone is super, super nice. I wish the back was the frosted glass, because this is just the smooth glass that can get very fingerprinty and oily, and then it feels a little bit slippery. But the aluminum edges around the side of the phone actually feel super nice, and you can definitely use this without a case. Something worth noting that is definitely important when looking at used iPhones is going to be the battery health. So if you head into settings here and we go down to battery health and charging, somehow mine's at 100%. I think I got pretty lucky with this device. I picked it up used for a little over $100, and it's a 256 gigabyte unlocked iPhone 11 with 100% battery health. That is pretty sweet and actually very hard to find. So this is super clean and pretty much a perfect example of an iPhone 11. I don't know how this thing was not used. I think this phone was just really not used, and the battery is still in great condition. But when you're picking up a used one, you gotta look at that battery health. I would stay away from anything that's under 85%, because that's just really gonna limit your experience. While these phones had good battery life when they came out in 2019, they just don't stack up against modern iPhones like the iPhone 15 and newer. So if you can find one of these with a higher percentage battery health, that's going to help you stretch out just the maximum amount of hours that you can get from this device before having to recharge it. So that is something that I think is important to keep in mind. You can obviously use low power mode, which is interesting because on ProMotion devices, low power mode is going to drop the display down to 60 Hertz, which feels very jaggedy and rough. But on a 60 Hertz panel like the iPhone 11, low power mode keeps it at 60. So it feels the exact same, and performance on the device is decreased. I think they drop the clock speed on the CPU, and then some background tasks are reduced as well. So you can pretty much keep this thing in low power mode all the time and not notice a huge difference, other than applications are probably going to be a little bit slower, but you're not going to have the annoyance of the ProMotion display bumping down to 60 Hertz because this thing's already at 60 Hertz. So no loss there. The iPhone 11 is available in 3 configurations, 64 gigabytes, 128, and 256. I think if you're picking one of these up in 2026, you really should stay away from that 64 gigabyte model, as that is going to fill up so fast. iOS 26 takes up a good chunk of that, and that really does not leave you much room at all for applications or photos and videos. So if you can find the 128 or the 256 gigabyte model, I think you'll be in pretty good shape. I would just strongly advise staying away from the 64 gigabyte capacity, as I really think that's going to limit your experience here with the iPhone 11, especially here in 2026 with the size of current applications and the amount of caching that they do to store files. That storage is going to fill up really, really fast. In terms of iOS, the iPhone 11 currently supports iOS 26, and it is actually going to get iOS 27 here in the fall of 2026. And that is actually a bit of a surprise. I thought Apple was going to cut off the iPhone 11 series from this update, but they kept it around. So that means that you get a full another year of software support, and that is actually very nice because I think iOS 27 is a refinement of 26, and it is going to improve on performance and battery life. So that is really good to see that the iPhone 11 makes the list on iOS 27 compatible devices. That said, you are definitely going to see some differences between this device and newer ones in terms of the features you get on iOS 27. You're not going to get the new Siri, you don't have Apple Intelligence, you're stuck with the old Siri that comes on these devices, but I think that's okay. For the current price point and the age of this phone, you really can't expect too much of it. And speaking of pricing, let's head over to eBay and see how much you can pick up an iPhone 11 for here in 2026. All right, so let's take a look here. We're gonna go and search for iPhone 11. Let's go ahead and do unlocked and see what we can get in terms of listings here for the iPhone 11. I'm gonna set up some filters. We're gonna do buy it now. Let's sort by newly listed. I try to avoid all of these sponsored and clickbait listings, and doing a newly listed search is usually a pretty good way of filtering that out. So we are certainly going to get some other listings besides just an iPhone 11, and I would love to find some that are just in good working condition. So here is one. This is a 64 gigabyte, unfortunately, and it has a degraded battery. That is a problem that you're going to run into on a lot of these older iPhones. But for $125 plus shipping, you can get an unlocked 64 gigabyte iPhone 11, but quite frankly, I would stay away from the 64 gigabyte capacities. Here is a 128 gigabyte one. This is a little more expensive, $145, and this looks to be in fairly good condition. You get all the accessories. No photos of the device actually turned on, so it's hard to see what the battery capacity is on this. I would love to find a really good listing. Okay, here's an interesting one. This is an iPhone 11 Pro, so this is not the iPhone 11, but its more powerful and more feature-packed sibling. This is a 512 gigabyte model. That is pretty cool to see. This is SIM unlocked, which is fantastic. Battery is at 88. That is actually not too bad considering the age of this phone. $200 plus $10 shipping. That is gonna cost you a little bit of damage here on the rear. Looks like the back glass is cracked, so a little bit of cosmetic damage, but that's actually not a bad deal at all. Okay, so here's a 256 gigabyte one. That is pretty cool to see. This is $150. I think that's a fair deal. You're getting the max capacity here for the iPhone 11, and it looks to be in pretty good condition. Says it is unlocked, and there is no information about the battery health. I do wish more sellers would include that in the listing because especially with these old devices, you'd really love to see what the condition of that battery is in before you buy it. Something else to look out for is Face ID not working. When these devices have a replaced LCD panel, Face ID does not work, as you can see here. So that is something to be aware of when looking for older devices. Face ID does not work when the screen's been replaced, at least not when it's been replaced by third-party sources. So it seems like for under 200 bucks, you can find yourself an iPhone 11, at least on the used eBay market. If you do a little bit of searching and are a bit patient, you might be able to find a newer device, or you might be able to find an 11 Pro for under 200 bucks as well. So that said, the value of these here in 2026 is pretty good. The iPhone 11 is still getting current software support, and if you can find one with a higher tier storage capacity as well as good battery health, I think you've got yourself a very solid device that is capable of doing almost everything that you can do on a modern phone. It's just gonna be a little bit slower. The photos are gonna be a little bit worse. But for the price point, you really can't expect too much from this device. I think it's a good value here in 2026, especially when you're looking at something 150 bucks and cheaper if you can get a good deal on one of these. I think it's a great device, and I can definitely recommend the iPhone 11 in 2026. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you found this video helpful. Leave me a comment down below how you feel about the iPhone 11 or if you're still using one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.